Hello, this is Mike Swanson. This is another segment of the Past American Century. Got a very special guest with me today. Speaking with Dr. Walt Brown. How you doing today, Walt?
Oh, I'm good. I'm good. Spring is here.
Definitely.
Finally.
This is my favorite time of year, too. But you've done something to make this month a little bit more exciting than most months. You did interview the other day with Chuck Ocelli, and I'm going to link to that. You talked about your book, The Kennedy Execution, with him, which I actually got him finally to want to read. I told him it's one of the most important books written about the assassination, kind of a culmination of your chronology and you know, a lot of other things that you've done. But you just put out a new book the other day, so I was hoping we can get the word out on that.
Yeah, and as I think on it, and it just hit me in your introduction, they are the two most dissimilar JFK assassination books that I could think of. As long as I exclude Bugliosi, they're not the same. Obviously, you're referring to the Judyth Vary Baker, in her own words, and that's new and hot off the stove. Its genesis came from a researcher in Michigan named Tim Smith. I met Tim at a conference back in '03 out in Pittsburgh, and then I went out to Michigan in January of '04, and a bunch of us went out to dinner. I have not seen Tim since then, but we keep in touch on the phone for 3-4 hours a week. And the one thing that, obviously, we talk about the new stuff that's coming out here and there, and he always insists, and rightly so, on original sources. A, are they in the book? Or B, is there a knowledge of them expressed in the book? And for an example, somebody sent me a copy of a trial of Oswald. Now, I did People v. Lee Harvey Oswald back in 1991-92, and then there was a new one done a couple of years ago. And I flipped through it, and I stopped at one page, and I looked, and I saw Chief of Police Will Fritz. I just thought the guy didn't do his homework. And that's the kind of thing that troubles Tim and me, obviously, because it sows confusion. So we've been focusing on the concept of original sources, and we put together an idea for a series of books in their own words. Marina Oswald in her own words, Ruth Payne in her own words, the Parkland doctors in their own words, the Secret Service, Dealey Plaza eyewitnesses, the autopsy people, on down. A few dozen copies of each book to keep the original sources available. If people don't want to go out and spend hundreds of dollars for the 26 volumes and the HSCA volumes. So once we got that idea going, we had to come to grips with the question of, is Judyth Vary Baker an original source? And is she a legitimate original source? So we put together 250 pages of her story, the romance, and the plot against Castro, and then kind of, I don't know how else to put it, but we kind of superimposed reality over it, and it came up more than $1 short. She has a following. There's no denying that. My suspicion is that veteran researchers, people that have been at this for a good number of years, know the source material better and could have done exactly what I did by challenging some of the statements. New people that come into the case, show up for a seminar or a symposium or who knows what, then they hear about this wonderful romance and, you know, her love for Oswald the week after she got married. And, you know, I suppose it's something you can just latch onto and somehow make all the things that happened maybe a little more gentle. But to me, it just doesn't come across that way. There are things in there that defy belief and all imaginable logic. When I originally read her books, I just felt as if she was taking what we knew about New Orleans from April till September, when Oswald arrived and when he left, and she was inserting herself into the story in events that have never been verified, and to a great extent can't be verified. She told of Lee Oswald having brought a box of Marina's clothes with him from Dallas to New Orleans when he went. And my thought when I read that was, Marina only owned a box of clothes. But Judyth was loaned those clothes so she could impersonate Marina Oswald at Guy Bannister's office with Oswald. And Oswald explains this is Marina. Now, whether or not Guy Bannister was going to inspect the clothing and make sure it was a Russian, peasant outfit, I don't know. But this is my wife Marina, and she only speaks Russian. And they go on for a little bit. The next thing you know, Marina and Bannister, the Marina character, they're talking back and forth in English. And 2 pages before, she only knew Russian. And the impersonation seems a little bit foolish. And there's no hint of that. The one person that could speak to events within Bannister's office was the secretary, Delphine Roberts. She never talked about A, Oswald bringing his wife, B, Oswald twirling guns around in that office, which is suggested in there because Oswald left his guns there so they weren't within reach of his 14-month-old daughter, which is kind of ridiculous, but there's just no proof. And so many of the allegations like that lack proof, or they rely on a leap of faith, and that's not how you write history.
Well, I know myself that it's kind of fun. I mean, she's been a controversial figure in the JFK assassination community, and I put it this way: I've known of your work for for a long time because I read your books as they first came out, the trial book and some of the others, The People versus Lee Harvey Oswald. And that was in the 90s. But after 9/11, I kind of just stopped, just got away from the Kennedy assassination stuff and started reading other things and just kind of, took a break, you could say, and then got back into it around 2013 and actually met you at that Pittsburgh Silhouette Conference.
Yep, Pittsburgh in 13.
Yeah, but what's funny is I was away from this kind of like Rip Van Winkle when Judyth Baker really got big. And all I did was see her, in a video. It was a recording of the Men Who Killed, an episode she did of the Men Who Killed Kennedy thing, and I looked at it for like 10 minutes and just thought, well, what she's saying is ridiculous, and I don't believe it. I just don't believe it, but whatever, and just didn't take it very seriously.
In December of 2002, Nigel Turner was here for 3 days, here at the house. And I'll never forget it. He got here just about lunchtime the first day, and I said, "Listen, are you hungry?" And he said, "Well, maybe we could have a splash of tea." And 3 hours later, I said, "You hungry? Can I get?" No. Let's do some film. And then I was sitting under his floodlight for 6 hours. Finally, at 1 a.m, after not having lunch or dinner, I said, "Look, I got to cook something." But while we were talking off camera, he said, "Listen, I'm thinking of doing an episode with this woman that claims to be, Oswald's lover from the summer of '63." And he said, "What's your take?" And I just shook my head like, I came very close to saying, "If you want to have her on your program, you don't need me." And he was sitting sideways at my dining room table, and he just kind of turned away from me, and I could see his reflection in the brake front that was to his right. And when I said, whatever it was that I said that kind of delegitimized her, at least in my own eyes, he laughed about the whole thing. And the reflection was laughing. But then he went ahead and did it. And I saw the thing, and I was disappointed. I was disappointed in the whole 3 episodes that they ran together, and the disappointment only magnified when they killed it. I mean, it was killed dead in the water within a week. Particularly the episode I was in. So be it. But I read what she had to say, and except for the Men Who Killed Kennedy, I have no concept of what she has said in public. I don't know. There's nothing in the book that quotes public statements of hers, because I've never heard her speak and I've never watched the videos. And there's really nothing she could say except to take the stuff back that seems pretty foolish on face. There's kind of a come to Jesus mentality about all of it. And I have trouble with that because she confessed to multiple felonies in her written work. Conspiracy to commit murder, accessory to commit murder before and after the fact, accessory to gun running. It goes on and on. And maybe that's a person that needs to come to Jesus, but don't make that story into a come to Jesus romance, because she's committing adultery within hours of when she got married. And it's wrong. It's wrong.
Well, I didn't really know. Actually, I mean, I honestly didn't really know much of what she was actually saying until I read your book here, because I didn't really pay a lot of attention to her. I just saw her for a few minutes in a video and just said, I just don't believe it. And one reason I thought that is because she is not the first person who has come forward and claimed to have known, David Ferry and Clay Shaw and Guy Bannister and Cubans for example, there's someone named Robert Morrow who's dead. He's not the Robert Morrow now that's on Facebook, but there's a guy named Robert Morrow who said he worked for the CIA and was involved with David Ferrie and all these kind of people, and he wrote a book, and I read the book.
Yeah.
And to me,
he delivered 7.65 Mannlicher Carcano rifles to the kill team in Dallas. And those are guns that no kill team would ever use because they're junk. Oswald's gun was originally a 7.65, and it was rebarreled to 6.5, just as the pistol he allegedly fired had been rebarreled, so the ballistics were less than useless. But I know what you're speaking of in terms of Robert Morrow. Ed Haslam did some good work in terms of what was going on with Oshner and Mary Sherman and the cancer crusade, and Judyth Baker didn't exist in that book. And then all of a sudden he does another book, and she's in the center of it. Based on, hey, trust me, this is what happened. I was there. But Haslam did his digging, and he didn't find her. But when you get into some of the stuff that just, the day that they checked on the volunteer the alleged volunteer who'd been injected with this cancer cocktail up in the mental hospital in northern Louisiana, Oswald drives up with Judyth, and of course Oswald wasn't a driver. She footnotes 32 people that saw Oswald drive, and it's an inaccurate footnote. Those 32 people, some of whom believe they saw Oswald drive, the rest of whom believe they saw Oswald at a time when he could not have been where he was seen. But they weren't, clearly he wasn't driving. And that's a huge difference. But in this case, he was able to drive, and he drove with the cancer stuff in a thermos. And why they needed it, I don't know, because the guy had already been injected. And they had car trouble coming back, and she said, Lee, you got to get me, it was a Saturday night, Lee, you got to get me back by 10:30, because my husband, who sells encyclopedias, works until 10:30. And that's one of the defies logic stories, because nobody is going to knock on anybody's door at 10 after 10 at night on a Saturday and try to sell them encyclopedias. It's going to happen. But there had to be a reason. She could probably prove that he was an encyclopedia salesman. Proving that he was knocking on doors at 10 after 10 or up till 10:30 is another matter. At the beginning of the Oswald romance, he was working on an oil rig. And there are times when he's present, but he's invisible. And she was going to one of these mystery phone booths where she could get free calls from Oswald. And as she gets there, the phone's ringing, and her husband's in the car, and he's oblivious. And she gets on the phone, and she's yakking with Oswald, and he's oblivious. It's as if she wasn't in the picture, and he was just sitting there in the car, texting people before they had text messages. And when the serious stuff, when you look at some of the more serious allegations, they start the ball rolling down a hill, and it's like a snowball. It just gains momentum and bulk as it goes. Oswald, whatever he was in Russia, and I said this in so many words on Chuck's show last night, we don't really know Oswald's full story in Russia. somebody wants us to think he was a spy. Maybe he was. He might have been sent there as a distraction so that the real spies couldn't be followed. He might have been an accidental tourist. Where he got the money, I don't know, because he didn't have much. He might have been just a sophomoric little jerk that wanted to say, hey, look at me, I went to Russia. I'm important. But when he got there, according to her, at some point, the KGB tortured him. And they couldn't break him. And when they realized they couldn't break him, they apologized and gave him a nice apartment. Now, you know, I've done a 2,000-page study of World War II on the Eastern Front, the Russians and the Germans. And I've done a lot of research digging into the NKVD, which was the precursor to the KGB, as well as the GRU, which Marina Oswald's uncle was part of. That's Russia's military intelligence. If the NKVD or the KGB asked you a question that they wanted to get an answer to, they got it. The only name tag that you can put on somebody that refused to answer questions to the KGB is a corpse. Because you answered or you suffered. Gary Powers, when those 2-3 dozen Air Force pilots who were now on the payroll of the CIA, when they were trained, they were told, look, if for whatever reason, and it's not going to happen, but if it happens, if you go down if you're captured by the Russians, anything they ask you, tell them. Because they will get it out of you either way. and that was made clear as day to Powers. And Powers answered all the questions. He fudged on the altitude a little bit, and they couldn't prove him wrong. But he told them everything they wanted to know.
Well, from what
Oswald, go ahead.
Oh, from what I understand too, with Gary Powers, when he came back home, even though he talked, as you said, he wasn't punished or disgraced for it.
No, there was at the time there was a feeling because his flight, which I'm convinced was sabotaged from the get-go, and we could do a whole show on that. There was a feeling that he should have committed suicide. So he could not have been alive to prove the Russians' allegations about what our overflights were about. And he was extremely unpopular. Then they took him into the Senate for a hearing, and Barry Goldwater was one of the people. Prescott Bush was one of the people, and the other one might have been Strom Thurmond. And the best friend Powers had in the room was Barry Goldwater. And when Barry Goldwater's your best friend in the room, you better watch out for the others. But it was just it was for show. They let him go. There was no deal, and he got all his back pay. He was getting $2,500 a month for sitting in prison in Russia. But if the KGB wants to get answers out of him, they will do it. There were German soldiers captured on the Russian front. There'd be 5 or 6 of them march into a room, and they'd say, "Where is your unit located?" "I'm not telling." Okay. They poured hot, molten lead down that guy's throat, which was obviously fatal in a matter of seconds. The other 5 got very talkative. But they couldn't break Lee Oswald, who's on his own over there with no support whatsoever and who's distrusted by the U.S. Embassy, Snyder and McVicker. It's silly to even imagine it. And you don't put the words KGB and apology in the same book, much less in the same sentence. And that's just, it didn't happen. It didn't happen like that. The Secret Service sought out Lee Oswald so that he would help them to suggest possible ambush sites along the motorcade on November 22nd. That would be the first time in the history of the Secret Service that they ever went to a private citizen and asked for help. Two, are they going to just pluck that private citizen out of a hat and say, oh, his name is Lee Oswald, without knowing that he defected to Russia and was on a broadcast in August saying, I'm a Marxist-Leninist. You know, Viva Fidel. It's absolutely not going to happen. And what could Oswald tell him? He was taking the bus to work. I guarantee you, he never traveled over at least half of that 12-mile motorcade route. So what can he tell him? Well, she shoehorned the thing into, he suggested maybe it could be at the Trade Mart, maybe it could be at Dealey Plaza, or maybe it could be at Love Field. Oh, yeah, those are the obvious places. I don't think Lee Oswald was ever at, or certainly not in, the Trade Mart. He wouldn't know anything about it. It was a very complicated building with catwalks and what have you, but I doubt he knew that. But there it is. He was the go-to guy for the Secret Service, and needless to say, there's never a word of that in the Secret Service records, and of course there wouldn't be. The Secret Service had their burn party, and a lot of stuff went up in smoke. So, oh yeah, Oswald did help them, but all his records were burned. Believe what you will. The whole focus. She admits 2/3 of the way through the book, she got lost in her own high school. Okay, I can believe that. But then she just wanders into New Orleans from a bus stop in the middle of the night, finds a lodging, meets Oswald in a post office the next day, starts just out of the clear blue sky speaking Russian to him, which she used to speak to her anti-Castro friends in Florida. And they strike up a friendship. And within 100 hours of her getting off the bus in New Orleans, she is inside a high-level conspiracy, Bannister, Oshner, Vary, Shaw, Oswald, if you believe he's involved, to murder a foreign head of state. You have all these highly placed right-wing fanatics, and they just welcome this teenager who's on a work grant to study medicine. And then they spend all the time trying to develop this cancer thing, but there's not remotely enough told to make sense of what they were actually doing. They were killing all of David Ferry's mice. They brought in marmoset monkeys. Then they wanted to bring in green African monkeys. And there's places in her narrative where the monkeys are found to be having, caught the cancer 2 weeks before they arrived in the United States. The timing just goes off track. And every animal that was injected with cancer that she subsequently eviscerated and took cancer cells out of is an act of animal cruelty. Because you can experiment using animals to cure a disease, but they weren't trying to cure any disease, they were trying to create one. And that's a different story, and it's illegal. The reason they wanted to kill Castro was to save the life of John Kennedy. Vary would publicly bash Kennedy up one side and down the other, but privately he'd tell Judyth and Lee, look, I have to be that way to these guys, but if we can kill Castro by October, Kennedy will survive.
Yes, one funny thing about her account is she makes David Vary almost sound like he's a nice guy. And if someone found an audio recording of him and he don't sound like a nice guy in the audio recording.
Yeah, no, it kind of omits his trip, the supposed trip he took to Cleveland where he was going to be ordained, and they said, we're not ordaining you. And it omits Eastern Airlines firing him for his, habits with little boys. And there's places where Vary is giving her advice about relationships with Oswald, and I'm thinking, where does David Vary come off on advice on relationships between men and women? I know the recording you're talking about, and he does not. Joe Pesci didn't do him justice in the movie JFK, because you just couldn't be David Vary. But again, they were gonna kill Castro to save Kennedy, and it all came down to getting chemicals to Cuba, and to get those chemicals somehow to three magical doctors that could work their way into Castro's inner circle and use the chemicals on him and cover for the x-rays that are taken and give him false treatments, and eventually he'd be dead. There's no hint of how long this stuff would take to kill you. So when Oswald leaves for Mexico in September, in order for Kennedy to survive, to follow the story, Castro has to be dead within a month. And the chemicals, what she calls the bio weapon, had a very, very limited half-life. Just before Oswald was ready to go, they gave him a new batch of chemicals. So what does he do? He takes the bus. Somebody, your uncle's dying and you want to see him, in Frisco before it's too late. So you take a Trailways bus for 3 days and by then he's dead. No, you get on a plane. It was absurd. And then he gets to the place in Mexico, and he's not going to get a visa to Cuba, even if they expedite everything. He's not going to get any kind of anything for weeks. And by the time he does, the stuff in the thermos is going to be just slightly less potent than Kool-Aid. But what happens? He failed to meet his contact. That's all you're told.
And all this effort to do it, going on, all the experimenting, all these things they've done, and it comes down to that.
All the hours in the laboratory, all the dead mice, all the dead monkeys, all of the stench, all of the plotting, all of the machinations all comes down to one sentence: he didn't meet his contact. So he decides, well, I got to go home. And he goes to some place and gives the stuff to somebody. Period. And then he returns to Dallas where he is debriefed. What's he going to tell him? I didn't meet my contact and I gave the stuff to somebody. Write up the report. It just comes up a buck short. And the people, as I said, the people that have been doing research, a lot of whom we've lost. Mark Lane's gone, Harold Weisberg is gone, Sylvia Marr, John Davis, Gaten Fonzie. It's a long list. The survivors, the vast majority of them each know a story or two. She supposedly said X. Well, I heard she supposedly said Y. Well, but, I heard she supposedly came out with Z. X, Y, and Z, it's a triangle, but it's not the whole picture. I made it a greatest hits album. And if people who doubt her read it, I'm convinced that they will doubt her more than they do when they open the cover. If people who follow her blindly read it, and they may or may not change their opinion in any way. And the point is not to change anybody's opinion, but to reinforce, if possible, your beliefs. And if you can't reinforce them, then you got to change them. But in that regard, there's one thing I do know. Anybody that has doubts about her is not going to read this book and say, "Oh, now I believe her." That's not going to happen.
Well, like I said, I didn't know the specifics of what she's saying, and when I read this and just what it makes it even more absurd. But to me, like when I was first interested in this and kind of got out of it around the time of 2003, after the Iraq War, basically, I know that was the timing of it.
Yep.
She wasn't in the Warren Commission, the House Select Committee. She wasn't in assassination books or anybody's research. She was nowhere. And then when I got back into this stuff in 2013, then she's everywhere. But was nowhere in the historical record to be found. And to me, there are other people that made claims like Robert Morrow, as I mentioned, but she's different because I fear that what she has done is created a big distraction from real research and real works.
That's a question that the book has to answer. And the readers of the book have to answer the question to themselves and to the people whom they respect and whom they work with and whom they're collegial with. The people that I have contact with will have nothing to do with it. For basically the reasons that I've put forth here today. But still, there's a following, and she demands loyalty because she pays. She now runs the conferences. And there's a lot of talk on the street. Where's she getting the money to do this? Well, I have no idea. I have no idea, and I'm not going to offer possible explanations. They've been offered. The possible explanations are out there. But she now controls the major conferences. The Dallas in November, 2 or 3 or 4 things, dog and pony shows here and there. There was one a month ago in Illinois that drew a handful of people. But when you've got a conference, JFK assassination, 2018, and the 3 stars of that conference are Roger Stone, Jim Fetzer, and Judyth Vary Baker. Those conferences are get-togethers where the people who swear loyalty to her and will not speak out, they all slap each other on the back and say, "Hey, great work, let's keep it up." and it's an inbred fraternity that is not always 100% honest. I had a chance to be on a couple of broadcasts with Mr. Fetzer. I said, no, I won't do it. I told the organizer why, and he said, come on, Walt, you've done so much. Jump into it. I said, look, I'm not going to do it. The day after the broadcast, the organizer called me up and said, Walt, I understand now why you didn't want to be on that broadcast. I said, well, next time, invite me and not the other fella, and I'll be glad to help. Because I've had my go-rounds with him. And I gave up on believing him when he made the point that no airplanes hit the World Trade Center and that the children killed up in Sandy Hook School in Connecticut were killed by Israeli commandos. Makes an interesting story, but it just wanders away from reality. I don't need that. And Roger Stone, come on.
Well,
no,
I think we're in a critical, moment in the JFK research community, and for posterity, because here she's become a big figure, and you have people, as you mentioned, Roger Stone, and there'd be others that I think treat this as like a game or something. I don't know what the game is they're playing, but at the same time, these JFK files have come out the other year. There's important research being done. John Newman's coming out with books. Your Kennedy execution's out there. Your chronology's out there. And what's going to be the long-lasting thing, 10 years from now? It has to be the real research and not this craziness.
Well, you'll see more work from Talbot. You'll see more good work from Jeff Morley. You'll see more good stuff from Newman. I wasn't crazy about his first two, but his third book was tremendous. I've heard through the grapevine that he was going to speak out about her. Well, he doesn't have to now. It's not necessary. We don't need a chorus denigrating her. Just let people read what I got out there and make up their own minds. But as you said, in terms of what's happened, I would venture a guess that a healthy percentage of people who have an interest in the assassination do not want it solved. They want this week's new book. They want next week's new conspiracy. Publish a book and tell me that Jacqueline Kennedy killed her husband, and we'll read that one, and that'll blow in the wind for a week. Marina jumps in every time something new, very regularly when something new comes out. There was a book called Prayer Man, where you see somebody in the door of the book depository at some point after the shooting. You can't tell when it is. And the author showed the picture to Marina, and she says, my God, that's Lee. When I did People v. Oswald in 92, I was getting phone calls from Marina Oswald. Walt, you've done it. This is it. I'll never talk about crazy stories. The phone rings. My ex is in the kitchen cooking, and I'm doing blah, blah, blah. And she comes into my office. She says, dinner's ready. And I put my hand over the phone, and I say, Marina Oswald. And she goes, oh, yeah, sure, right. Didn't believe. A couple of days later, the phone rings. I let her answer it. Hi, this is Marina. Can I speak to Walt? Oops. Marina Oswald has fallen in love with a lot of books that have come out. And given what she went through, and make no mistake, she suffers from what we're talking about today. Because her testimony was clear that once Oswald was out of work, once he was out of Riley Coffee, July 19th, he was around. he was sitting in the house. He was dry firing the rifle, which she later said she never saw. He was reading all the time. It was just, he was there. She alibied him. But yet, according to Baker, he's running from Oshner to Bannister to Ferry to Adrian Alba, where every Friday he gets an envelope handed to him from some secret agent in a car. And this has got to redound to Marina.
Well, I got a chuckle out of Baker saying that Carlos Marcello is paying for their dinners and stuff.
Yeah, and when she didn't say hello to Marcello in one point, because he pretended to tip his hat to her, one of the guys grabbed her. And she said, I didn't know who he was. Let's call us Marcello. I don't know who he is. I don't know anybody. I don't have any kind of memory. I'm a scientist. And the other thing that I put in the book, they made a very clear point because of this conspiracy that they're doing, that nothing was to be written down. Well, if you're going to figure out how to get a rocket to Mars, you're going to have to write some stuff down. If you're going to create a chemical situation that can create cancer, you're going to write stuff down. And after that declamation about we are not going to write anything down, there are several places in her narrative where she hands over her reports or she reviews somebody else's reports. And every time it happened, I wrote, but we weren't going to write anything down. She forgot.
Mm. Well, we got, if people, well, I know we're going to have a Kindle version up, but it's not going to be out till June. So if people want to get the book now, they really need to contact you and get the physical version of it. So what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, there's a bunch of options. And in rethinking Chuck's show last night, if they want the book we're talking about now, Judyth Vary Baker, in her own words, $19.95, and mail it to Walt Brown, Post Office Box 174, Hillsdale, just like it sounds, New Jersey, 07642. And you'll have the book in 4 days. Chuck talked a lot last night about Kennedy execution. He said, everybody should get both of them. If anybody wants the both of them, they would cost more individually, but if anybody sends $50, they'll get both books in 4 days. Same address. And if they want to buy it from me using PayPal, the PayPal account is K as in Kennedy, I, A, S as in Sam, JFK at AOL.com. KIAS JFK at AOL.com. PayPal. The book will be in your mailbox in 4 days. Because with the situation with my back right now, I can't travel too much. I mean, the grocery store is a trip. And of course, Oswald was part of the assassination team and the abort team.
Yeah, I got it. It's the first time I ever heard of that, too.
And the reason he was on the assassination team was he got sucked into it like he was in a vacuum. And he couldn't get out. Because if he got out, they, whoever they are, and we don't know who they are. He shares an awful lot of secrets in the book with his sidebar lover, and he never tells who they are. But if he didn't go through, if he didn't take the rifle to the book depository on Friday morning, they were going to kill Judyth, Marina, and Lee's 2 children. I don't know. Because the $170 that Oswald left in a coffee cup from Marina would have bought 4 bus tickets, probably hundreds of miles. He could have gone home Thursday night and awakened Saturday morning in Chicago or New York with his family, and nobody would know.
Yeah, it really seems like it almost seems like he didn't know what was going to happen or how he was going to be in trouble.
Well, I don't think he realized. I fully agree with any hypothesis that says he was set up as the patsy.
Right.
Absolutely.
Sure.
That it was brilliantly done, whoever they are that did it.
Mm-hmm.
I put together a hypothesis for what I think happened in that regard at the tail end of the book called Treachery in Dallas from 1995. But instead of saying, here's what happened, I called it a hypothesis. Here's one possibility of how it fell out. And I think when Oswald woke up to the reality of hearing shots being fired at the president and realizing a gun that could be linked to him was on the 6th floor, he panicked. I mean, he just went into a horrible panic and went east, caught a bus going back into traffic, got off the bus, took a taxi cab, but got out of the taxi cab 6 blocks from his house. Why? Because he feared an ambush. He didn't want to get out. He wanted to scope out the neighborhood, see what's going on, and then get in the house and get the pistol. And if he knew he was going to be in the kind of trouble he was in at 12:30 on Friday, he'd have had that pistol in his pocket at that time. Because if he can sneak a rifle into the Texas School Book Depository Company, not building, company, he could damn sure sneak a pistol in. But he didn't. He had to go home to get his gun. That's not the behavior of an assassin. And then what does he do? He goes for a walk. He walks 9/10 of a mile, allegedly kills a cop, and runs to the theater and keeps changing seats. None of it makes any sense. And the book under discussion now does not clarify. It just doesn't. It's unfortunate. I don't want, much as I'm critical of some of these things that seem like flights of fantasy, this isn't personal. This is about me protecting the 50 plus years of work that I've done on this, and more than 40,000 pages that I've published that are God's honest research, and they're all sourced. There's nothing lacking in the way of footnotes or trust me, folks. And even to a greater extent, and I mentioned this to Chuck last night, I said this whole story uses President Kennedy as a punchline, and that's just not acceptable. We lost, as a nation, we lost more than we'd ever know. What we thought we lost on that Friday, we're still discovering what we lost.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing, like I was saying about getting out of not as being interested in this or taking a break from it for 10 years or so. That was the big discovery I made was, what Kennedy was really doing when he was president. And I went, I was a graduate history student in the late 90s. I had a professor that was one of the top professors on American foreign policy. And it wasn't until after 2013 and the Jim Douglas book came out and some other stuff, and I did, reading a new things, that I had any concept of what really was even going on, beyond what was in the JFK movie, basically.
Yeah. Well,
and it only touches the surface.
There wouldn't have been Vietnam, and that would have freed up billions in 1964, $65 to be better spent than what's going on now.
Well, it wasn't just Vietnam, but the biggest shocker, and you got it in the Kennedy execution, is how the Cold War and the space race, the arms race wasn't a race. We were so far ahead of them, and it's just crazy.
We looked like we were losing the space race, propaganda. But what we did just embarrassed them, and the arms race was absolutely lopsided. But it was magnificent publicity. And while Stuart Symington was a viable candidate in 1960 from Missouri, he got up in the Senate and he said, within a year, the Russians will have 3,000 ICBMs on station to attack us. And that's a lot of rockets. One of Eisenhower's guys gets to him and says, "Hey, do you see what Symington said today?" Eisenhower gets on the phone and calls Allen Dulles and says, "What's the CIA's projection of Russian ICBMs over the next 2-3 years?" And Dulles says, "We figure they'll probably have 15 ICBMs built by 1962. That's a long way from 3,000. But when the Senate heard that 3,000, when the American public heard it, there was a clamor. Come on, we got to win the arms race. So we were putting a Polaris submarine on station just about every month, so it could sit on the bottom of the ocean and pop up as needed. We were putting Minuteman missiles in silos, one a day on average. And we just had the Soviets overwhelmed. They knew they couldn't win the big one. Of course, everybody would lose. But it would have just been a horror. And once the defense industries capitalized on Sputnik, and believe me, they capitalized. If the scientists down at the Cape needed a gizmo, it got delivered on a Sunday. It was a wooden box with metal bands on it. The Metal Workers Union got triple time and a half on Sunday to cut the metal bands off that box. The Woodworkers Union got triple time and a half, opened the box, the wood. Then the scientists got the gizmo. And it was incredibly expensive, but we had to catch up because the Russians orbited a radio. It beeped every, 42 seconds or something like that. And if they can orbit that, it could be a bomb, who knows who. Well, it couldn't, but it sounded good. Then Yuri Gagarin was put in orbit. He wasn't the first, but he was the first one that came back alive. Because you never knew what the Russians were doing till the mission was over, because they never knew if the guys were going to come back alive or not. And the Russians tried a new method to lighten their spaceships, and they incinerated at least one astronaut and maybe more, and it was done so secretively that we tried to do the same thing, and that caused the Apollo 1 fire in 1967. And 10 years after the Russians had tried it and learned the lesson the hard way. But we poured untold dollars into it. What the Russians were doing was a propaganda stuff. Hey, look, third world. The United States is big and pounds its chest, but we're the one getting it done. And then they realized, no, we're not.
Yeah, you're right. What you said about the thing about Judyth Baker and Kennedy. You know, Kennedy's a footnote, and a punchline, and what Baker's work is really all about is just her. It's just her, and not about why is even the assassination important itself. You know, and what, you know, why should we even care? You know, what was going on? What's the real history of the time? And your Kennedy execution lays that out. And I recommend people get both books, get the chronology too. Probably should do a show in the future talking about more of that, because you gotta. It's not just it's not just a chronology. It's really a series of books. One about the entire U2 incident that you talked about earlier, but
critical.
But thanks for taking the time to talk with me and my listeners out there.
Oh, it's my pleasure to share time with you, with your audiences, with the people who read my stuff. 25 years ago, I was at a dinner, and the person hosting the dinner, it was Kennedy related, they said, we'd like to go around and have each person at the dinner stand up and make a statement. And when it got to my turn, I stood up and I said, as horrible as November 22nd was to me as a 16-year-old, I said, never could I have imagined on that gray, dreary day in northern New Jersey that most of my best friends would be people I met because of that day. And it's true. I keep in touch with a lot of people, many of whom encouraged this project. Because they wanted me to make the snowball so they could throw it. But, you know, your audience, the readers, and more than anything else, the people who really want the truth about John F. Kennedy. If you put together the best of all the stuff that's out there, we know about 98% of the story. I think a lot of it's in the Kennedy execution. I know there's a lot of it in the chronology, but I doubt there's very much of it in this new book. And that's the rub. So, Mike, I thank you very much for having me on. I'd like to get together for a chronology, and I'd love to talk about the World War II.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Definitely got to do that, too.
That is a story.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. Take care. Hello to your readers, and get in touch at Post Office Box 174 in Hillsdale, New Jersey, 07642.
Thank you.
When you're done reading, drop me a line. Tell me what you thought.
Well, we'll be talking again soon. Thanks again.
Thanks again, Mike.